Hey everyone, it's me, Amy Walter. Before we start the conversation, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by the Cook Political Report. If you are interested in more of our great content, consider subscribing. Go to cookpolitical.com/subscribe. Listeners can use the discount code ODD10, that's ODD, the number 10, to save 10% on any subscription. This offer is only available to new subscribers. Hello and welcome to the Odd Years. I'm Amy Walter. So we're just a couple of weeks here into Trump 2.0. How are you feeling about this? Whether you expected it or not, it seems pretty safe to say that President Trump's first days have been defined by its intensity, a very fast-moving news cycle, and at times, that trademark chaos we remember from his first term. And that's why I love conversations like this one with the Wall Street Journal's Molly Ball. She's the kind of journalist who offers clear-headed insight into the many twists and turns and helps us consider the bigger questions we should be asking about what success or failure might look like for Trump this time around. So I wanted to have Molly on to give us some context for these early days of Trump's second term, but I also really wanted to ask her about how she approaches her job of political storytelling, especially when it involves accessing some of our highest profile politicians, which is what she did when she wrote a book about Nancy Pelosi a few years back. Molly Ball is the Wall Street Journal's senior political correspondent. You can check out her podcast, Trump 2.0, which comes out every Friday for the first 100 days of the second Trump administration. Molly's also the author of Pelosi, a biography of Nancy Pelosi, the first woman Speaker of the House. We chatted on Wednesday, January 29th. We have to say these things because stuff moves so fast, the timestamp becomes more important than ever. So here's my conversation with Molly Ball. Molly Ball, hello.
Hello, Amy.
Excellent to have you here. We are only on day, I think, 6. We are speaking on January 29th. Is that right?
9?
9, 7? Yes.
Well, it depends if you're only counting the weekdays.
You are correct.
But I believe that this president works on weekends.
I think so too. So it is officially Wednesday, January 29th. We have been in Trump 2.0 for only 9 days, and yet the pace seems as manic as ever. Will you help us to understand how this first 10 days compares to, say, the first of the Trump 2017 era, and what this will tell us, or what this could tell us for about the next 4 years?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot because as someone who covered the first Trump administration, some aspects of this feel deeply familiar.
Right.
Some of the personnel have returned. Of course, the president is the same person and has many of the same tendencies. Other things are different. And primarily, that was something that came into focus during the transition, which was much more focused and intentional and organized than the transition at the end of the 2016 campaign
Right.
going into 2017. The other thing that's really different is the opposition. Democrats have taken much longer to pick themselves off the mat and figure out how to move forward. I'm going to be attending at the end of this week the DNC winter meeting where they're trying to pick a new chair. And, ironically, Democrats are in a better position in some ways now. The House majority that the Republicans have is much narrower than in 2017, when people don't necessarily remember this, but Paul Ryan was the speaker at the time, and he could lose up to 27 Republican votes and still pass a bill. Mike Johnson can lose 1. So in a lot of ways, Republicans feel much more dominant. They feel like they have more of a mandate. Trump, of course, won the popular vote this time, although he did not quite get 50%. And you have a party that is much more Trump focused, right? It's in 2017. That's another big difference. it was much more Paul Ryan's Republican Party, Mitt Romney's Republican Party. There was much more dissent within the GOP ranks. There's certainly plenty of arguments within and among Republicans right now. And again, with that narrow margin, we're going to see that play out, I think, dramatically over the next few months in Congress. But overall, this is a party that is much more loyal to Trump and to what they believe he represents. So, yeah, less resistance, more Trump loyalty, a more focused and organized sense of where exactly Trump wants to take the government. The other big difference, I would say, is Elon Musk. Having the richest man in the world in your corner, another thing people may not remember is that back in 2017, Elon Musk was still functionally a Democrat. He'd supported Barack Obama. He saw his main mission in life, besides getting to Mars, as solving climate change by inventing electric cars. And he actually resigned from a Trump advisory council over Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. This time, of course, Elon Musk has an office in the West Wing, has cheerled Trump doing things like withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, and is imposing his own disruptive style on the federal bureaucracy in ways that we are seeing play out with this federal buyout offer in Washington. So, a lot of similarities, a lot of differences.
That was a great review of that, Molly. And that's, I think, maybe one of the other questions that a lot of folks, including myself, are wondering, which is how much of the disruption that both Musk and now, I would say, like you did, a more organized Trump White House, is this disruption for disruption's sake, Molly, or are they really trying to fundamentally alter the way that the federal government and the way that basically the American rule of law, constitutional law, works?
I think it's very much the latter. I don't think this is just chaos for chaos's sake. I don't think they're just, throwing things in the air to see where they land. I think, if you look at the things that Russ Vought has said over the years, the incoming director of the Office of Management and Budget, who was also very involved with the famous Heritage Foundation document Project 2025, there is a very well fleshed out worldview underlying all of this. And I think Elon Musk shares it, and it's part of the animating impulse behind his attempts to impose what he calls greater efficiency on the government. This idea that, what critics call Trump's sort of authoritarian tendencies are really just sort of frustration with the so-called deep state, the way that the federal bureaucracy and the proliferation of executive agencies and regulations and rules have made it impossible to get anything done. So you get elected president, the voters have said, yeah, we want you to do these things you said you were going to do in the campaign, and then you can't actually do any of them, either because there are bureaucrats actively working to thwart you, or because there are just these thickets of rules and regulations that take years and years to wade your way through, or Congress is gridlocked and limited in the things that it's willing to do, and the legal system is going to fight you at every turn with activist judges that are going to block the things you want to do. So I would say there's a really coherent worldview that says you have to actually attack the system if you want to change it. And by the way, voters too are frustrated and fed up with the system of government. Voters too feel like part of the problem with our democracy is it just doesn't deliver for people because nothing ever happens. And it's this sort of, slow moving battleship that no one, even the most strong-willed president, has the ability to turn around. Right. Now, that's sort of the positive case for it, right? The negative case for it is when you disrupt things, you disrupt people's lives. You disrupt the healthcare and services that they depend on. And in practice, voters tend to freak out about that a little bit. But I would say there is an intentionality to all of this. And they are pushing the boundaries, but they're pushing the boundaries because they want to implement the things that they want to do, even if those things upset the apple cart.
Well, and even if those things perhaps are used
against them when they aren't in power? And that's, I think, to me, another interesting question. Going forward, you see Congress actually ceding its power willingly to the executive branch, which is easier when it's your party in charge. I do wonder, will we see when a Democrat gets to be the president of the United States at some point, will this be the new norm? And how will Republicans respond to that?
It's a really good question. I think a lot depends on what happens with all of these legal cases
Right.
and how the administration responds to them. There is the real possibility for a separation of powers confrontation and even crisis. If, for example, the administration decides to ignore a Supreme Court ruling that it doesn't like. Already we see, the flouting of congressional authority, right? I mean, it says it's one of the very first things it says in the Constitution is Congress gets to decide how taxpayer
Right.
money is spent. Uh, and then there's also a law from the 1970s that says the president doesn't get to just withhold that money when he doesn't think it's a good idea. But this administration believes that that 1974 law is unconstitutional, and so they are challenging it, you know, uh, full throttle. And on his very first day in office, Trump ignored legislation passed by Congress and unanimously upheld by the Supreme Court in saying that he was not going to uh, get rid of TikTok. So already we have an administration that is really challenging uh, norms and laws and forcing a confrontation with the other branches of government. So when it comes to Congress, I think you have, a Republican Party that is on board with Trump's agenda, even if some of them might mutter under their breath that they think that this is their job. Some in Congress feel that they've sort of brought this on themselves by not doing their jobs. Right? You have a Congress that is perpetually gridlocked, dysfunctional, can barely even keep the lights on in the federal government. So it's no surprise that a president with what he views as a strong electoral mandate would seize power away from Congress. Now, part of what gets lost in this whole discussion about like executive orders, I think people do have this misimpression uh, that executive orders are something that presidents just started doing because they were fed up with Congress not doing its job, and so Obama famously saying, "I'm going to use my pen and my
The
phone
phone and the pen.
and,
Yeah.
and, and do the things that Congress isn't doing." But there's a very long history of executive orders in this country, everything from the Emancipation Proclamation to Japanese internment. So presidents for a long time have used their executive authority to impose wide-ranging policy change on the country. And the whole point of the separation of powers is that it's always a bit of a dance. It's always a bit of a balance. But I think to actually answer your question without answering it, we don't actually know yet where this is all going to land and what kind of precedent is going to be set because we are still in very early stages.
Absolutely. And that to me is the other big question. I mean, as I said, we are recording this on the 29th. This is the day that RFK Jr. goes up to the Hill. It is clear from my conversations, I'm sure you've had similar conversations, Molly, that there is plenty of agitation among Republicans about RFK Jr., even more so than we've seen for any of the other cabinet appointments. These EOs that went out, these executive orders went out, as you talked about Russ Vought, and that many of them came from his Project 2025. He has not yet been voted on. It suggests to me that Trump feels really strongly that no matter who he puts up, regardless of how his own party may feel about these folks and their frustrations, he sees no reason why he would get pushback. Is that fair? A way to look at this, that he thinks Congress is there to basically rubber stamp what I do. And if they go against me, there will be repercussions.
I would say, first of all, the controversial nominees who are having hearings this week are going to be a big test.
Yeah.
As much as Pete Hegseth, the new Secretary of Defense, gave a lot of Republicans heartburn and barely squeaked through his confirmation vote last week. There is considerably more, or at least qualitatively different, concern about someone like an RFK. And it's a real test of the way that Trump has tried to reshape the Republican Party. The people around Trump believe that Trump worked very hard to court RFK and bring him into the tent during the campaign, and is sort of repaying that part of his coalition by putting RFK in an important position in the government. Same with Tulsi Gabbard. Kash Patel, a bit of a different animal, but the point is that these nominees, who are former Democrats, represent an ideological challenge to Republicans. They are not conservatives in the traditional sense of the word. And so, as much as Republicans might recoil at RFK's long history of personal indiscretions, the drug use and the philandering and the weird stuff with animals, I think what they're really going to be pushing him on is the sort of ideological challenge he presents on issues like abortion, his, shall we say, unorthodox views on unscientific and dangerous views on vaccines.
Yeah, because that seems to me, there's still, as much as Trump has changed the party and the people who have come to Washington, there is still a pretty, especially in the Senate, a pretty significant number of Republicans who come from that sort of traditional small c conservative, who believe in business, and that they still do see those as allies as opposed to enemies, and that RFK Jr.'s views on so many of these issues goes against that sort of, again, small c conservative view of how we should view these sorts of things.
Absolutely. I think he's going to get a lot of questions on regulation, right? RFK is
Right.
someone who wants to impose quite a lot more regulation on things like the food industry, things like
Right.
pharmaceuticals. And so, and Republicans have generally been friendly to those
Yep.
industries. So,
Yep.
are they
Yep.
going to push him on what he wants to do there? Are they going to stick up for their allies in the business community? Or do they feel
Right.
like, I mean, look, a lot of these Republicans, and Trump has made this very clear, and people around him have made this very clear, feel like they squeaked in on Trump's coattails. And Trump has a stronger mandate than they do, right? There were several states where Trump won the state and Republican Senate candidates lost, places
Right.
like Michigan and
Yep.
Wisconsin. So Republicans look at that and say, the president's more popular than we are, or at least he was in the election. The kinds of things that he's saying may have more of a popular mandate than that traditional small c conservative Paul Ryan
Mm.
Republican platform, right? Trump
Mm-hmm.
became president
Mm-hmm.
by saying, I am getting rid of, the Paul Ryan idea of curtailing Social Security and Medicare. We are never going to do that. Uh, and so the Republicans, who still in their heart of hearts cherish the idea of entitlement reform, have realized they have to zip it and sit on their hands if they want to remain viable in this new realigned political order.
Well, which brings me to a great profile you did a couple weeks back of John Thune, who's the new majority leader of the Senate, who does come from that more small c traditional conservative wing. He's been in Congress, what is it now, 20 years? No more, 30 years almost. Yeah,
That's right. But he's been in the Senate for 20 years.
that's right. So he came in 96,
And then he lost an election in 02, right? So there was a 2-year gap there.
there we go. And, I remember those days, as I'm sure you do, where actually Democrats were the ruling party in South Dakota. There were two Democratic senators, including the then majority leader, who Thune ended up beating, Tom Daschle, in that race. He has this balancing act, right, between that wing of the party and the new Trumpian wing. What did you learn about how he's going at that, and how successful do you think he's going to be?
Thank you for the kind words about my piece on Leader Thune. Thune is very much an institutionalist. He's sort of a protege of Mitch McConnell, who, is not friends with Donald Trump anymore. I think it's fair to say. Uh, and he is pretty honest about that fact, right? He's not. Some of these guys, you can kind of tell they're pretending to be more on board with Trumpism than they really are, right? But Thune is pretty honest about the fact that he's got a sort of different style, different sensibility, even a different set of priorities than Trump does, and he's gone crosswise with Trump at times. Trump even threatened to primary him a couple of years ago. But I think it's testament to Thune's political strength that that primary threat never materialized. He was never in danger. He strongly considered not running for reelection because of this feeling that he was sort of out of step with the new direction of the Republican Party. But McConnell, among others, urged him to stay on, sort of hinted that he might get a chance to occupy his current position of leader. And so, he survived as long as he has by being able to balance these competing interests. And that's the job of a Senate majority leader. He, on the one hand, has the advantage of the Senate now being actually a wider margin than the House, which is very rare. But the House majority is so narrow that that's probably where a lot of the drama and infighting is going to be. On the other hand, the Senate still has the filibuster. And we saw just yesterday, Democrats stuck together on a bill about the International Criminal Court, and it went down to defeat. And there's a potential confrontation for Thune with Trump there if Trump spent his entire first term jawboning Mitch McConnell, trying to get him to get rid of the filibuster.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you: is would John Thune stand up for the filibuster in the way that McConnell did?
So far, he says he will. His very first speech on the Senate floor upon becoming Senate Majority Leader was an impassioned defense of the filibuster. Every time it's come up, he has sworn that it's something he wants to preserve. So, if it gets to the point where the Senate is the obstacle to something that Trump wants, again, that could be a major confrontation. I think Thune has pretty clearly laid down a marker, and he feels like he has his members behind him. The Senate caucus is Trumpier now than it was in 2017.
Sure.
And there is a pretty vocal faction, and you saw this play out in the leadership race where Thune was up against Senator Rick Scott, who sort of speaks for that conservative faction. And that caucus is growing, that group of conservatives who want to see the Senate move faster and be more like the House, be more aggressive, arguably more extreme, as opposed to the sort of calming influence that it's traditionally been. I would use the saucer metaphor. Someone recently pointed out to me does not make sense, so I'm not going to use the saucer metaphor.
Well, not only does it not make sense, it is that my young colleagues, when I told them about the cooling saucer, said, "Who uses a saucer with coffee?"
Right.
They don't even know that there is a saucer in a cup, and that alone blew their mind.
But I thought the saucer was basically a coaster. The saucer's there to protect the furniture. It doesn't cool. You don't pour anything in the saucer.
Apparently, that's what it is for.
What?
Yeah. Apparently, you're supposed to pour it in the saucer. It cools it. Then you pour it back into the cup and drink it.
That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, this has been a fun digression about dinnerware.
I know.
But the point being that while you do have more sort of hardcore Freedom Caucus types in the Senate, it's still not there for the most part. That's why Thune won the leadership race. And so he believes that this is the direction his members want him to go in terms of not forcing any kind of confrontation with Trump, not standing up to Trump in an aggressive way, but quietly seeking to make the chamber function while preserving its prerogatives. And so we'll see whether push comes to shove on that.
One more question just about the Trump piece of all of this. We spend a lot of time talking about his ideological designs and those around him. But there's also another factor that you have to bring up when it comes to Trump is this transactional piece. And I think TikTok is a good example of this. And this is certainly what Democrats will be arguing for the next 4 years, is that his intentions really are more focused on what he can get out of it than what he's going to be doing for either his voters or, again, a big, consistent ideological change. How do you see those two things balancing out? The transactional piece of Donald Trump, who we saw during the first term, he would bounce all over the place. There was not always a lot of consistency. But now, especially in these first few days where he's been pretty consistent about rolling out all of those things that he talked about on the campaign trail, even as those things may be not working to the benefit of his party.
Well, I think you have to separate that into a couple of different buckets. There's the sort of what's good for Donald Trump personally, right? What's good for his bottom line, the bottom line of his companies, his legal predicaments, right? We've already
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
him start to take revenge on his political enemies, remove security protection from people who crossed him, fire people, investigate people at the Justice Department who were part of the special counsel investigation, pardon the Jan 6 rioters, that sort of thing. Um, and then there's, I think, a somewhat separate bucket of, is it going to pay off for all of these people who are sucking up to Trump in order not to have their ox gored on policy
Mm,
wise, right? All
right.
these tech
Right.
CEOs who
Yep.
got front row seats at the inauguration. Will their companies be spared when the administration and Congress start thinking about the various things on their plate that could affect those industries? The various foreign leaders who are doing their best to show up and say nice things about the new administration. Will that do them any good when the tariffs come down or the deportation flights start landing?
Right.
Uh, it certainly worked out in the last term. His critics would say worked out pretty well for Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un, but I think there's a real question about and the tariff deadline, by the way, is this weekend. Trump has
That's right.
said that February 1st is when he's going to start imposing these tariffs. And we still do not know, because he didn't do them on day one, how much of this is something he really wants to do and how much of it is a negotiating posture, because you can't do both. You can't use the tariffs as a source of government revenue that's going to make us all rich, according to Donald Trump and basically zero economists. But then also not do the tariffs because actually you're just trying to get a better trade deal. And the tariffs are just a threat to make, Canada and Mexico come to the table and Putin lay off the Ukrainians and so forth. So that is another thing that I think is going to be a really big test and a sort of forcing mechanism for the administration. They can keep putting it off, but you can only put it off so long before people get the idea that you weren't serious about it all along. And there are certainly many people in the business community who hope that that's the case, right? You talk to
Absolutely.
CEOs and they
Absolutely.
have throughout the campaign really been in denial about the tariff threats. And it's an unfalsifiable claim, right? Because if it was just for leverage, if it was just a negotiating posture, you can't come out and say that, or it wouldn't be effective. So I'm really going to be watching that aspect. And again, I think that's going to signal a lot about this transactional nature of Trump, right? Whether he is trying to make deals, or and if he is, right, he certainly does value that personal flattery, that personal diplomacy, or whether he's really determined to carry out these things that he believes he has a mandate to do. And the last thing I'll say is just the ultimate report card for all of this uh, is twofold. It's the economy and it's elections, right? The ultimate verdict on this is going to be delivered by, first of all, does the economy continue to perform well? And do people feel good about it? Because voters are willing to put up with a whole lot if they feel like that's the case. And if it's not, they get pretty angry pretty fast, as we saw with inflation over the last few years.
Yeah.
And then, if the electorate starts getting cold feet about all this drastic change and feels like, well, all I really wanted was, cheaper groceries, not all this mess. We could start to see the political backlash pretty quickly. Could start to see the beleaguered Democratic Party start to do better in spite of itself. Remember, in 2017, Trump came out of the gate with a lot of chaos and confusion and opposition, and Democrats proceeded to win the next two national elections pretty handily. Yep. So that's the real, I think, report card on all of this.
A quick break, and we'll be back with Molly Ball. It might be a political odd year, but here at the Cook Political Report, we're as busy as ever. Over the next few weeks, we'll be rolling out race ratings for governors, the House, and the Senate. It's never too early to think about next year's midterms, and we'll have everything you need to know about these races. But it's only available to Cook Political Report subscribers. So don't wait. Go to cookpolitical.com/subscribe. Listeners can use the discount code ODD10. That's ODD, the number 10, to save 10% on any subscription. This offer is available only to new subscribers.
Molly, I'm going to change gears for a second because the other reason I wanted you on here, besides the fact that you are an incredible reporter and chronicler of all things Washington, is your ability to really capture people and to write these really compelling stories about them, in many ways because you have access to them. You write these profiles. We talked about John Thune. You wrote a book about Nancy Pelosi. Again, in the early stages of the Trump era. So let's start with this, which is first, is this what you always knew you wanted to do, that you really enjoy that personal piece of covering politics?
Well, thank you so much for all those incredible compliments. And I would say yes and no. So my journalism career began when I started a newspaper in the 5th grade in my little neighborhood in the Denver suburbs. And me and my friends sweet talked the local Office Depot into giving us free photocopies, and went door to door selling copies for, I think, 50 cents. So I always liked to write. I always wanted to be a writer in some sense. And I began my newspaper career as a general assignment reporter, and then sort of fell into covering politics because when I was working for a newspaper in Las Vegas, and the bigger paper in town was tired of me scooping them and wanted to hire me, the only job they had open was covering politics. So no offense to present company, but I've never been a political junkie, really. I just see politics as one of many ways to tell great stories. And I think, frankly, there's not enough great storytelling in politics. There are so many fascinating characters. Our democracy and the intricacies of it, and the ways that people try to use the levers of power in order to make change in their lives and the lives of people around them. That's an endlessly fascinating story to tell, and it's the story of America. And it's a million different stories. I'm sort of a generalist, and I love the way that politics enables you to understand all kinds of different things that are going on in this country, the sort of big socio-political currents that define our history, and the personalities. So so I am an adherent to the sort of strongman theory of history. I do think that history is defined by the human beings who sort of take the reins of our politics and society and culture, and I am fascinated by them. I've always been very nonpartisan. I think it's really important to have a million flowers can bloom in media, and there's certainly a place for people who are more opinionated. And I think get to sort of say what I think based on the conclusions I've drawn from my reporting. but I don't take sides, and I don't have a side, honestly. To the extent that I have political opinions, they're sort of all over the map, and I'm pretty humble about the fact that I probably don't know the answers to most policy questions. So I'm genuinely interested
Right.
in what different people have to say. So I'm obviously not going to tell you all my secrets for getting people to talk to me.
Come on.
It's always a challenge. It is the biggest challenge of this job. But I do think, in a serious way, that the most important thing is just to do your job with integrity
Yeah.
and not pull any punches out of fear that, a door will close in your face, and not go easy on anyone because you like them or agree with them or anything like that. The only calling card you have if you're going to be in this business for a long time is that credibility, is that reputation, is the fact that people have read your work and can say, all right, even if she said something nasty about my side, she probably also said something nasty about the other side, and maybe there was a kernel of truth to it. So I started writing about Nancy Pelosi when I had recently been hired by Time Magazine in 2017. And at that time, I was interested in her because she was the sort of central figure of the Democratic resistance and the highest ranking woman in American political history at a time when women were driving American politics. After Trump was elected, you had the Women's March, you had an outpouring of women running for office and engaging in
Yeah.
activism. And so it was ironic to me that the highest ranking woman in American political history was viewed as this sort of liability. The conversation at that time was, why can't we get her to go away? Why won't she leave? Um, there's been a pretty big turnaround, I think, in Nancy Pelosi's reputation since that time.
That's right. That's right.
But the profile I wrote about her was sort of noting that, although she had accomplished all of these things for the causes that she believes in, uh, she wasn't getting a lot of respect for it. And frankly, I think that another reason, hopefully, political figures are willing to spend time with me is I do try to understand them. I'm not just here to smack people down or do a gotcha. I really do want to tell their story in a way that is honest and unsparing, but that feels true to them, that makes them feel understood and makes others feel they understand them. Um, I don't write puff pieces, but I don't write hit pieces either. So
Do you like embed in their lives? Like, here I am at your front door at 6 in the morning. Let's go to Pilates together. Let's have lunch, whatever it is.
I will take whatever I can get, and it's not often quite that level, but sometimes. And I did a cover story for Time on John Fetterman's treatment for depression, where I had a lot of conversations with him that were very raw, and I went to his house and spent time with his family and talked to his doctors about his time in the hospital. And so I am interested in getting as close as I possibly can to the core of who people are, and I've been fortunate that readers seem to appreciate that, and that some people at least, are still willing to talk to me.
Are you going to go back to Fetterman? Now has become more of a central figure in certainly than I expected in terms of who was going to be sort of the leading voice for Democrats. Are you surprised by that? The way in which he has been able to both work with Republicans while still criticizing Republicans, criticizing his own party, but still standing firm in his bona fides as a progressive Democrat. Like, how do you explain all of that?
I do want to spend more time with him. I think he's a fascinating figure. I wouldn't
Yeah,
necessarily have predicted this exact trajectory, but you can certainly see the seeds of it in his background.
yeah.
Uh, Everything from his views on Israel, they may not have been quite this vocal in the past, but he always, in his previous campaigns, said that he was a supporter of Israel, and that's something that has pissed off a lot of progressives. Uh, but also, but he's also always been, a hard-charging partisan who was willing to take on the other side in a brash way, but who was not afraid to be himself. And so I'm a little surprised that he hasn't stuck with the more progressive wing of the party, the sort of Bernie Sanders of the world, because that
Yes.
was very
Yes.
much where he was positioned in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
Um, Even if now he disclaims it. Uh, but I think it's really been the way that he has found his voice in the aftermath of his stroke and the depression is by realizing that he's sort of been liberated. He's sort of realized there's nothing else they can do
That's
to
what I
him.
wondered.
He almost
Yeah.
died, and now sort of no one can touch him. He's not afraid of anything. It sort of doesn't matter to him where the chips fall, and so he's going to follow his own instincts. And he does have, it turns out, very strong and sort of unorthodox instincts in this regard. So I think he's going to
Yeah.
be a really interesting figure uh, who is both going to be, a fighter for Democrats, but also someone who makes Democrats uncomfortable in a lot of
Right.
ways.
Because he's heterodox. And in this day and age, we don't do very well with that, right? You're either fully on the team or you're not.
Well, and he's not out of touch, too, right? He
Yes.
actually seems like he gets where people are coming from in places like rural Western Pennsylvania because
Yeah.
he actually knows those people. And like, Republicans love to call him a phony because actually, he went to he went to Harvard for grad school and grew up relatively privileged. He didn't really come out of like a steel mill or whatever. The jogging shorts are sort of an affectation. But he clearly gets it, right? And he clearly has been listening to those voters and understand and is able to make them feel represented and heard. And I think, frankly, that's a lot of the function of government and Congress is to make people feel that they are represented. You look at someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I've also spent time with traveling around her district and
Mm.
speaking to her and speaking to the voters who love her. And they feel powerfully represented by her. And you can say, well, what has she actually done for them? That's what she does for them. She makes them feel like they have a voice and they are heard. And again, I think that is a powerful function of Congress and government, in addition to all the actual laws that they pass.
Yeah, and I am a big believer in this as well, Molly, that, we cover politics, and I think more and more so covering politics in a way that is very data driven, right? We have to look at the polls and the demographics, but at the end of the day, the candidates matter. And especially in races that are being determined by 10,000 voters, somebody who is seen as being more authentic or who voters feel some connection to, or that they think, oh, this person's kind of a phony, right? Maybe they say all the right things. Maybe they're of my party, but I just don't buy it. And I'm always amazed. I mean, you and I get to sit down and talk to these people one on one, and sometimes for hours at a time. And I'm amazed at how quickly voters pick up on the stuff that you and I know because we've been talking to them and hear about it. And then within 5 minutes, they'll watch an ad and go, that guy's a phony, or she doesn't believe that.
Yep.
And you go, wow, how did you do that? But so the human piece, I think, and I'm with you. I'm a big believer in it, especially at a time where I think we can both agree that Donald Trump's success is driven by who he is. He is a force of personality that I think Republicans realize it cannot be replicated. Now, what Trumpism looks like without Trump is going to be a fascinating story for all of us to cover. But who he is um, and how he presents is really such an incredibly important piece of that, and it goes all the way down to members of Congress.
Well, it goes all the way down to the voters, right? Because that's where it really all comes from. And I think it's really important that I spent the first several years of my political reporting career working for a local newspaper, covering, voter registration drives in 100-degree parking lots on the outskirts of Las Vegas, watching the 2008 foreclosure crisis unfold in the absolute epicenter of where that was happening and seeing how it affected
Yeah.
people's lives, talking to people in micro campaigns for the state legislature and city council and county commission races, and really trying as hard as I can, and I continue to try to do this, to understand where people are coming from, rather than passing judgment on them or trying to tell them what to think. Uh, so because voters may be weird or obnoxious or prejudiced or what have you, but everybody gets the same number of votes per person. And and from that point of view, they
Yep.
all have a legitimate voice. And so I do spend a lot of time during campaigns trying to travel to different parts of the country and get my finger on the pulse of real America. And I've lived in 10 different states, and I think this country is fascinating. It is such a big, diverse place, and there's so much to learn about it.
I do too. It's just amazing that it actually works.
Debatable, but
Okay.
but that, to go back to Trump, right? There's this whole debate about, is he sort of the symptom or the cause of this populist revolt?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you do see it breaking out all over the world. You see
Yep.
these populist movements gaining purchase in Europe, in Asia, in South America, and so there's clearly something bigger happening here than one person. But like, the reason that Republicans are loyal to Trump in Congress isn't because he might be mean to them. It's because he's got a stranglehold on their voters. If the Republican base was out there telling their members of Congress, actually, we want you to hold the line for George W. Bush style Republican
Yep.
viewpoints, they would do that. But their voters are telling them the
Yep.
opposite. They're telling them,
Yep.
we like this much better than the way the party was fashioned before, and so they feel like they have to go along with it for that reason.
And then finally, based on that, just as a follow up to that, um, given again that the early disruptions that we're seeing on the pausing of this federal aid could actually go and hurt the very people that Donald Trump is ostensibly fighting for. And I guess the question is, how much are his voters willing to go along with these programs, these ideas that Trump and his allies are putting forward, before they say, this actually isn't what I want. I wanted you to do this, but I didn't think it was going to be this.
And that's the $1 million question going forward,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as many have noted, including you, Trump won with a much more working class, diverse coalition than the
Yeah.
Republican Party has historically had. Do they then feel like he's delivering for them? He certainly is on a lot of what we term the culture war, the executive order on transgender treatments for children, the anti-DEI push in the federal government. A lot of those working class voters of all races have conservative attitudes about race and gender. And so maybe they do feel like they're getting what they asked for there. A lot of working class voters also feel like the establishment hasn't been working for them. And so
That's right.
when you look at things like the deindustrialization of the Rust Belt, which Trump blames on trade and China, and the way that those communities have been hollowed out by uh, drugs and the death of manufacturing. Do they look at the deportations that are happening and say, yes, this is what we asked for? Or do they feel that the administration has overreached if things
Right.
like Medicaid end up getting cut off? And I
Yep.
do think there's a danger of crying wolf here for the Democrats, because nothing actually has been taken away from anyone.
That's right. That's right.
And over the past decade plus, we've seen, Republicans repeatedly shut down the government, and there's an outcry, and then the lights get turned back on again. And the lesson they sort of learn from that is, that the voters really learn is, well, it doesn't really matter if you shut down the federal government because my life doesn't really change.
100%.
Like maybe I had to postpone my trip to a national park by a day. But in general, like again, this sort of leviathan of the government is not possible to disrupt in a severe enough manner that people actually feel it.
That's right. That's right. This is the fascinating piece going forward. As I said, I can't remember when I actually used this line, but for years, both parties, but Democrats especially, have been saying, how terrible Republicans are and they're going to do all these terrible things. And voters said, well, I don't think that that's actually happening, right? They're going to cut Medicare. They're going to cut Social Security. You're never going to have Social Security anymore. Your grandmother's going to be, left out on the street in her wheelchair. And for all the hue and cry about that hasn't occurred. And so there is a level of skepticism among voters about just how these Republican plans are going to play out. The other thing is I do blame the sort of consultant class of political consultants who, look, it's an easy way to win a race is by saying not only is the other side terrible, but to say the entire system is corrupt. And I'm the one person that can solve it. And so, it's the equivalent of Coca-Cola going and running an ad campaign saying that soda is terrible for you. You shouldn't drink this stuff. It's going to shorten your lifespan. And then coming out 5 minutes later and saying, hey, buy a Diet Coke, right? And that's what the parties have been doing forever. They've been delegitimizing the entire process, saying, whether it's Democrat or Republican, you guys are the problem, and the system is so corrupted. And voters go, you're right, it is. And so you want to disrupt it? Great. You're going to blow it up? Fine. That's not going to impact me.
Yeah.
Because you guys have told me it's all just a charade and a sham anyway.
And I think part of the reason that Democrats lost the last election, frankly, is because they made themselves the defenders of institutions that people no longer believe in. And so people looked at, a Kamala Harris giving, the speech on the ellipse and warning about Trump being a fascist dictator. And they said, but wait a minute, it's not working for me right now, right? Everything from the branches of government to things like higher education and all of the sort of systems that were put in place largely by the boomer generation. There's a feeling like they've outlived their usefulness and and they're not reformable. So instead, we have to tear them down and try and start over. And so I don't know if anybody's capable of doing that or even wants to do that in earnest, since you have sort of one party that just wants to blow things up and the other that doesn't want anything to change. But I do think, I am naive enough to hold out hope that we could actually build something better that's worthy of people's trust.
Yeah, I am with you on that. Maybe we are just naive, but I do think there is an in-between of just complete nihilism and denialism, right? That things need to change, and that ultimately it's not pretty, but you get to something that is, we look back 30, 40 years from now and we go, oh, that's what happened. That was the impetus for this change.
Yeah.
But that's what we get to cover, which is really cool.
And we'll just keep on hoping, you and me, the Pollyannas.
We'll just keep on hoping for the best.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for this. This was fantastic, and really appreciate it. We look forward to reading more of your profiles soon.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. It's always fun to talk to you, on or off record.
Thank you so much for listening to The Odd Years. If you liked what you heard or want to make a suggestion, leave us a review or recommend us to a friend. You are our best way to get the word out about what we do. And if you want more from the Cook Political Report, consider becoming a subscriber. Go to cookpolitical.com/subscribe. Listeners can use the discount code ODD10, ODD, the number 10, to save 10% on any subscription. This offer is available only to new subscribers. The Odd Years is brought to you by the Cook Political Report and is produced by Becca Kaufman. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.